Just saw over there the US President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin were together over there. Looks like they were ready to speak to the media. They have both arrived at Anchorage in Alaska. Both of them greeted each other. They have met each other. They haven't met in the last 6 years, in fact. And there is going to be a 3-on-3 meeting that both these leaders are going to have, which means that the US President Donald Trump will be accompanied by 2 of his closest aides. And Putin, on the other hand, will also be accompanied by his Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his special envoy on foreign policy. Visuals on your screens of that very famous handshake that Trump is known for, and that was the handshake that Trump gave to the Russian president, both walking down the red carpet. And after a brief session of photo ops, they got inside US President Donald Trump's limousine and have been taken to the venue where the meeting is going to be held very, very shortly. In fact, the scheduled time for the meeting was 1 a.m. Indian Standard Time, 11:30 a.m. Alaska time, and we have 5 minutes past that scheduled time. So the meeting is on time expectedly and has begun already. There's lots at stake for Russia and more so for Ukraine, as there has been pressure that has been mounted by the European leaders for the US president not to sign an agreement, to not negotiate any deal, but allow for a trilateral to happen. This as just a stepping stone of sorts to warm up to the final trilateral meeting that Zelensky and the European leaders are expecting. All right, I am being joined by my guests. Let me introduce them to our guests. In fact, I have with me Mark Sutherland, who's the geopolitical commentator. Mark, thank you very much for joining me. And we just saw just a flash. It looks like the US President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart are likely to speak to the media before they go into the meeting room. Okay. We'll try to get him in just a short while. I also have with me Keith Vaz. Keith, can you hear me? All right, I'm being told that Julia is joining me on the telecast. Julia, good to have you on the telecast with us. What do you make of this historic summit that is taking place in Alaska? President Trump and Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin both have met. They are likely to also speak to the media before the meeting starts.
Well, I mean, in Ukraine, it's not seen as a very historic event. There are very, very low expectations. And of course, people in Ukraine really want the war to end. But if you talk to people on the front line and if you monitor daily the reports of Russian attacks, you can see that they did not stop attacking civilians and they did not stop their human safari that they do. They initially started this practice in Kherson, in one of the frontline oblasts. Now they do it along the entire front line. So Ukrainians are not very hopeful that this summit is going to become something historic, and that it's going to change something for us, because we understand that Russia does not want to stop the war, and President Trump has been reluctant so far to punish Russia for this behavior. And the composition of the delegation that he's bringing with him, I think, is a signal that he is more oriented towards economic deal making. So
Right.
we don't see it as very historic,
Okay,
unfortunately.
what do you make of this proposal that has been made by the European leaders as well as the Ukraine president, that there is in fact, okay, I'm just going to cut you short over there. I see visuals on us. Okay, there is likelihood, there is a very high chance that US President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart are in fact going to be speaking to the media. But coming back to you, Lisa, my question is, what do you make of this proposal of a trilateral, which is going to be which is most definitely going to be something that is going to happen if these talks fructify. And this has been an appeal that has been made by the Ukrainian president. The European leaders have been rallying behind the Ukrainian president for having that trilateral, and the US President Donald Trump is also speaking on the same lines. Not just US President, but Kremlin is also hopeful that there is something substantial that comes out of this meeting which can forge the path for the trilateral. Lisa, can you hear me? Julia, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, Julia, the question about the trilateral meeting and what do you hope and expect from it?
Well, I mean, it's important for Ukraine to have a trilateral meeting because it's something that, like something that President Putin claims is that Ukraine is not a country, is not a real country, that President Zelensky is not a real president, not a legitimate president. And so he is refusing to meet with Zelensky. But for Ukraine, meeting with Putin is important because A, this is the only way to make a peace deal, because then Russia will actually have some obligations, and B, it's Putin stopping his stupid claims that have no basis in reality. Ukraine is a sovereign, independent country, and Ukraine does have its agency, and Ukraine does decide its own future and its own fate. And so this, this meeting can take place only if Russia gives up its absolutely unrealistic demands, because so far its demands are totally out of control. They want Ukrainian troops to withdraw from Ukrainian territory that Russia has not captured. So Russia just added for Ukrainian regions to the Russian constitution and claims that those are Russian now. And as a prerequisite for any talks, it says that Ukraine has to withdraw from those territories. And Russia has to drop those demands if there is a meeting to take place.
All right, Josh is joining me on the telecast side. Now, Josh, it is quite likely, as we saw a glimpse of US President Donald Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin sitting with the media. There is likelihood that they speak before they get inside the meeting room. What is expected of the leaders when they make that when they make those statements in front of the cameras while they are both together?
Well, yes, Megha, it will be very interesting to see what is said, of course, ahead of these vital talks that have ramifications not just in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but also on bilateral relations between the US and Russia, which have been strained in recent times. We saw that warm embrace as they both stepped off their respective aircraft, and we do expect at least this initial statement to be cordial. Time has been spent with both Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump in the presidential limousine, which picked both leaders up, and the discussions that would have taken place already potentially setting the tone. Of course, some context on this. We do know that Donald Trump said in recent days that he will know within minutes whether Vladimir Putin is serious about peace in the Ukraine conflict. I wonder if there has been anything picked up from the US president relating to that feeling that he gets from Russian President Vladimir Putin. I expect it to be a cordial briefing. I expect the comments to be setting out what is to be discussed. We know that the Russia-Ukraine conflict is top of the agenda, but a nuclear conversation is set to take place, with tensions continuing to be there relating to nuclear assets that both countries have. Probably this is the most poignant time since the Cold War in which nuclear assets have been discussed. This is, of course, a conflict in Europe that is the deadliest since World War II. So a lot to be said, and we wait for that conference.
Yeah, and also let's also discuss about this three-on-three meeting that is going to be held. It is very important to note and significant that the members of the delegation that have been picked by President Trump as well as President Putin. And talking firstly about President Putin, of course, Sergei Lavrov is his loyalist, has been with him for a really long time. And talking about the second person, who is the special envoy who takes care of foreign policy. So these are the two leaders within his cabinet that have been cherry-picked by President Putin to hold talks with President Trump and his entourage.
Yes, absolutely. Both key figures in Putin's regime. As you mentioned, Lavrov is a pillar, a key ally, a staunch supporter of Vladimir Putin, and has been with him throughout his recent times as president of Russia. Lavrov often has conversations with other world leaders in Vladimir Putin's place, of course a foreign minister, but a key member of that team. Ushakov as well, a special envoy, an aide who looks at foreign policy. And I think this really encompasses the importance of these talks. It's not just bilateral relations between the US and Russia. There are so many other nations who are involved in either this conflict or the geopolitical ramifications that could come about because of these discussions. North Korean troops fighting alongside Russian troops against Ukraine. China, of course, keenly involved in these discussions. That Russia-China relationship we know is a strong one. Also, China, a key purchaser of Russian oil, something Trump has singled out, so far only hitting India with sanctions, with secondary sanctions because of this, but he has promised more. So a foreign relations expert in these meetings will be key for Vladimir Putin.
Right, absolutely. And talking about what is expected from the meeting. Now, the Kremlin statement came just a few hours ago saying that this meeting could go on up until 6 to 7 hours. No such statement has come from White House. But besides Trump showing his eagerness that there has to be some positive result that has to come out, he said if that does not happen, he's going to walk out of the meeting. And Kremlin is also hopeful that they are expecting some positive results to come out of this, and they are even hopeful and given this indication that there could in fact be a trilateral that may happen with vis-a-vis the results of this particular meeting. Everything hinges on this meeting between Trump and Putin.
Well, yes, it does seem so. I think most leaders across the world, most allies of Ukraine will acknowledge that there needs to be a trilateral meeting in order for any serious ground to be made in a peace deal. Ultimately, Ukraine could turn around and say no to anything that is agreed between Russia and the United States in this summit. A peace deal has to be two ways, and there is acknowledgement that Volodymyr Zelensky's nation and his officials will need to be involved in discussions. Let's not forget, 3 rounds of talks in Istanbul between Ukrainian and Russian delegations in recent months, leading to nothing but prisoner exchanges. Donald Trump really could hold the key here, and I think the significance is clear from that rhetoric from the Kremlin and also the Trump administration. Positivity is the message, but how much is rhetoric? Is Trump truly going to walk out on this summit if he thinks Putin doesn't want to deal? There's been rhetoric from the US which says that Putin is stalling to strengthen his hand. We wait to see.
Right, absolutely. Also, you know, there's information pouring in, source-based information. This is what Reuters has put out, that, you know, United States is mulling that there would be sanctions that would be imposed on these oil and gas companies that operate out of Russia, which is Rosneft and Lukoil. Again, there have been secondary sanctions that have been imposed on India for importing oil, particularly from Rosneft as well. What is the likelihood of a huge sanction that gets imposed, and obviously then what is going to be the impact of global crude, because that is going to have like a cascading effect on global oil and gas prices.
Trump's rhetoric around sanctions directly on Russia and these secondary sanctions, we have seen an ebb and flow like we do often with Donald Trump when he talks about these huge geopolitical situations. So far, India, the only nation sanctioned with secondary tariffs. But Trump has been clear. He says that countries buying Russian oil are fueling the Russian war machine. He says, of course, in recent times, that those sanctions would come in setting deadlines, but yet they haven't. This is a real opportunity for Trump and Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff to sit down with the Russian counterparts and truly put that point across. Whether we see sanctions today or not, it clearly is a threat that the US has and a tool that the US can use to try and manipulate this situation in their favour. Russia are fearful of these sanctions. Trump himself has said multiple times he doesn't care about the price of oil, something which again is different to what he's said in the past. And Russian oil not being sold to the level that it is would have a huge impact on oil prices and therefore a huge impact on global economics. This really is something that could influence the global economic situation massively based on potentially one man's wishes.
Right, absolutely. Thanks, Josh, for giving us that update on all that is happening on the ground. Stay on with me. I'm also being joined by Mark Sutherland right now. He's a geopolitical commentator. Mark, thanks so much for joining us on NewsX World. And of course, I would want to understand from you, how do you interpret this summit that is taking place in Anchorage in Alaska, and what do you expect is going to come out of that meeting that is taking place between the two leaders?
Well, good to be with you. I think my first comment is, and it's very humbling when you're listening to people like Julia who are talking from their country and talking about their country and people's lives. And one thing that we have to remember in all of this is that this is affecting people's lives. People are dying on both sides. This meeting is very important, and I totally and utterly understand why, on the Ukrainian point of view, they're saying, well, our president isn't there. We want this to lead to a meeting where it's a three-way. This war has gone on for far too long, and without going over certain history, it could have been sorted out. We could potentially say straight away in the beginning from after the invasion, and also historically going back to 2014. But one thing that we have to remember, this is, as Trump has always said, he said, I will get this sorted out in days. I think he passionately has always been about, I want the killing to stop. That's a phrase that he's constantly used. He hasn't met, Putin and Trump haven't met, I think, for 9-10 years. This is significant because Trump always wants to look people in the eye. But the key is this, and you've just been talking about it, or Joshua has, in regard to the economic effects of the price of oil and using those economic levers. That does affect the Russian economy, because the Russian economy is extremely militarized. That's where it's centering around that and using oil and gas to do that. The way I view it is this is fundamentally important with the kind of killing, which is just extremely sad and appalling on both sides. That needs to stop. But we also have to remind ourselves that Russia at presently is in 20% of Ukrainian land. And when anyone is talking about, oh, you're going to have to give up land, etc., and after all that Ukrainian has actually suffered, all the deaths and the destruction, that is not going to be a decision that they will want to make easily at all, because they want to then have their country back. And as Julia has said, if you're then dealing with an enemy that actually turns around and says, well, we don't recognize these borders, and now we have taken in territory, we need a long discussion in regard to that, going about Russian speaking part of Ukraine against the Russian border, and how he's turning around and saying, well, no, that's mine. The bottom line is that we want this to end, but I also feel very strongly it is deeply complicated.
Okay, Mark, stay on with me. I'm also being joined by Keith Vaz. He's the former UK minister. Keith, thank you very much for being with us on NewsX World. And currently, while there's such a clamor that is growing about the trilateral meeting, and I think a number of European leaders were not happy when Trump decided to first meet Putin, but there seems to be some consensus that has built over the last 3-4 days in the hopes that this is going to be just the precursor to the trilateral that Ukraine and Europe and NATO allies are hoping to happen. Keith, can you hear me? Keith, could you please unmute yourself?
Yeah, there we are. I was saying, good evening from London. This is not politics. This is show business. And what we saw today was the President of the United States applauding the President of Russia, the coordination of how they got off their planes, the fact that they walked together to the podium, then they got into the beast together and drove off together, is remarkable and extraordinary. So you have to hand it both to Trump and Putin. They both got so much to gain and so much to lose by what is happening today. It is pretty extraordinary and dramatic. Now, I don't know what's going to happen in terms of the end of these discussions. I do know that the slogan behind the podiums is pursuing peace. Now, pursuing peace is different from ceasefire today. So they're going to have their discussion. Everyone wins. Trump gets to change the story from Epstein and all the other issues. The Middle East, no one's talking about the Middle East today. The fact that tariffs are going on countries, no one's talking about that. And President Putin gets to win because whereas the European leaders refuse to meet him and treat him as something of a pariah, the most powerful man on earth is meeting him, giving him the red carpet treatment and clapping. So I am fascinated by what is going on. I don't think you can do something like this in 5 days. I think this has been planned by President Trump for some time, and he's executed it brilliantly. Where this leaves the people of Ukraine, as Mark has said, we don't know, because they have to be included in any final discussions. If this is just a get to meet you meeting, we haven't had a meeting for some time, so let's meet and show the world that we can get on. And it's already been a success, a remarkable success. If it's about getting a ceasefire in Ukraine, then we're, I think, a long way off that. And as Mark has also commented, they already have 20% of the land of Ukraine. Are they seriously expecting that suddenly, dramatically, they are going to give up all that they have gained?
Yeah.
All those people have died and it's all going to end in Alaska? I don't think so. I think there's much more to do, but it is fantastic television for all of us to watch.
Okay. All right, Keith, also trying to understand from you, you talk about, Trump has time and again made this statement very, very clear that there will have to be land that will have to be ceded by Ukraine. There's no other way around it. Russia's conditions continue to be the same, that they want territory that they have occupied to be handed over to Russia. If in this logjam where none of the parties are budging, how is there going to be any progress made? And this has been the question for the last, I don't know, since 2022.
You're absolutely right. You should be in Alaska asking this question of both the leaders when they come before the press in 6 hours or now 5 hours' time. This is the central question that needs to be asked. After all, they are in Alaska. The Russians sold Alaska to the Americans. Will the Russians now say to the greatest dealer of land I think the presidency's ever had, you got it for a song, 7.9 million isn't enough, we'd like some more money, or we'd like the land back? Where does this all end in terms of invasion, taking away the sovereignty of countries? Where does it all end? What about the Middle East? What about Africa? What about all these other countries? It's a very, very hard set of discussions. But what I'm saying is it is important that the dialogue begins somewhere. Wasn't it a Chinese proverb? A journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. Well, this is a very, very impressive step indeed, and one that I think will need to be pursued.
Okay, all right. I'm also being joined by Glenn Grant. Glenn, thank you very much for being with us on NewsX World today. And again, your first reactions to the meeting, you saw that handshake, you saw the walk on the red carpet, and of course, getting into the limousine, both the leaders sharing a joke. What is your perception of the setup that has been done for this grand summit?
Well, I have to agree with Keith completely that this is not a 5-minute thing. This has not just been pulled together in the last 5 minutes. And by the way, I'm in Kiev at the moment, so I've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of people this evening about what they think about it. You know, I think for me the most worrying thing is that here we have a mass murderer who is literally threatening the whole of Europe, not just Ukraine, and the most powerful man in the world is chatting to him like he's his best mate, chummy, I think would be the expression. You know, come along with me and sit and talk and let's get in the car and chat together. And you can see the smile on Putin's face. By the way, if that is the real Putin, because it might not be, but you can see the smile on the Putin's face in the car because he knows full well that he's won this round of the battle. I don't see much else happening apart from this because why would he?
Okay, Glenn, but also, you know, as Keith said that, you know, it's been far too long that this war has been going on. Earlier, none of the European leaders have shown any sort of initiative to hold talks, to have some negotiations. We saw under the Biden administration, there was no love lost between both the countries, and there was no, even the slightest of the indications that there was any proposals to hold those talks. But talks at the end, dialogue at the end of the day is important. Without a dialogue, without you know, face-to-face meetings, how can there ever be a solution that can be brought? How can peace be brought?
Well, let's not get silly about this. There's no dialogue because Putin doesn't want a dialogue. He's in a war to win, and Ukraine is in a war to survive, and there's no dialogue with Putin. Trump is not talk. If Trump is talking, he's not talking about Ukraine. He's talking about making money somewhere, or something between the two of them, some scheme that they can concoct. Because Trump has got no brain about stopping this war, other than if he can get money or something from it for himself and maybe for America, so he can get his you know, he can get his Nobel Peace Prize. The other Europeans know full well there's no chance of dialogue with Putin, so why bother?
So according to you, whose foreign policy would you rather be inclined towards? Was it the Biden administration who sent billions of dollars worth of weapons to Ukraine, versus Trump, who at this point of time wants to end this war, even at the cost of you know, losing those billions of dollars that America sells weapons to NATO and that are then handed over to Ukraine?
Neither of them, because neither of them are being realistic. Putin is after winning. He's not about to stop because America tells him to, or because of whatever America does. The only thing that will stop Putin is him being stopped. And the only way to do that is by war, because he's not about to do, if he makes an agreement, he's made 20 so far and broken all of them. So don't expect that anything agreement he makes will be anything other than to gain advantage in this war. It's a war. And people are trying to think of it like it's some, I don't know, a computer game. It's not. This is a war to the death. And unless people take it realistically, sorry, but Putin is going to win.
Okay. All right. Coming back to you, Mark, and trying to understand from you the larger picture, and also, you know, when he was on his aircraft, the Air Force One, before he landed in Anchorage, Trump was very straightforward in saying that if something does not materialize out of this meeting, he's going to walk out. Kremlin says this meeting is going to go on for about 6 hours. This is a three-on-three meeting that is taking place with both the delegations coming together, and the meeting right now has already commenced. With these kind of statements that we are seeing from Zelensky, from the Kremlin, the official statement that came from Trump has said before he actually landed in Anchorage, what do you gauge? What has been the sentiment of the key stakeholders here?
I think Keith and Glenn in many ways have described it rather well, where they're talking about the theatrics. But really, we want to see, as I have said, I've stood by this, that Trump is relational. But as what Glenn is alluding to, we want this to be taken seriously. As I've said, when Julia is here as well, it's very humbling. Keith, Glenn is in Kyiv. They are on the ground. They are seeing this with their own eyes, with what is going on. And as I say, we want all the suffering. We want all the suffering to end. However, if this is an opening gambit of talking, that is a good thing. But the problem is, you cannot negotiate unless the president of the particular country, e.g., Ukraine, is also involved. And I think Glenn has made it very, very clear. We are then dealing with someone, we're facing that reality that that Putin is not going to stop. Now, whether you can pull any more economic levers to absolutely collapse the Russian economy is a huge discussion. My number one thing on a personal level, yes, let's have these discussions as quick as we can and as long as we can, as long as they then are fruitful. And as I say, it's very easy for me to say this in the comfort of not being within the Ukraine and not being in Kyiv. But that is my prayer, that is my wish in this situation. And as I say again, presently they have invaded and they have 20% of Ukrainian land, and that is the huge sticking point. How do you get them back? That's the big issue.
Okay, all right. Keith, I do want to understand from you. Do you think at least there has been some positivity that has been created, some hope perhaps that there is likely to be most probably a trilateral that finally happens? That has been the long-standing demand of Ukraine and of the European leaders, of European Union, something, the sentiment that has been shared by Donald Trump as well, calling it a precursor to the trilateral that could be possible if there's something fruitful that appears from this meeting, emerges from this meeting. And Kremlin also making this very, very clear in its official statement that was released just a few hours ago, that if this meeting bears fruit, there is going to be a trilateral that happens. So which means this is exactly what Zelensky has been saying, even during those, delegation level meetings that are taking place in Turkey. The grouse that Zelensky shared was that why was he not face to face with Putin? And here's a chance, and hugely likely that it happens in the course of a few weeks, if and only if it all hinges on this meeting, if it goes on well.
The meeting will go on well. From someone who's been involved in summitry as a foreign minister, you don't have a meeting unless you know the outcome. So they already know the outcome. They're already going to say it's a success. They already know what's going to be agreed before they meet together. All this has been worked out. So there is not going to be a row. Of course, I could be wrong. Call me back later on if I'm wrong. But it's all going to go very well. They're going to give their press conference. They're going to agree a plan, which I hope will include, it must include President Zelensky. It's his country, after all. You can't make a decision without him being at the table. The European leaders won't be included. I think they're probably an irritant to both President Putin and to Donald Trump. Speaking here from London, they didn't really make the progress they should have made over the years because they were taking the lead from the Americans, which was you can't deal with Trump. There is Trump telling India on Independence Day, by the way, happy Independence Day to all at NewsX World, please don't buy oil from Russia. You're very bad, and I'm going to put on tariffs on you. And at the same time, applauding the president of Russia on a red carpet in Alaska. So anything could happen. But one thing is for sure, these two men would not have met together unless they already know the outcome. And the outcome for them is very good. The outcome for Ukraine, well, that's another matter. That needs to be included. It needs to be followed up, as you've said, with another meeting with President Zelensky. I would imagine it's unlikely to be the leaders, these two leaders and him. It's likely to be him and Lavrov and possibly Marco Rubio, possibly J.D. Vance, if he can finish his holiday in England. It'll be that kind of level. I somehow don't think that Zelensky is going to want to walk in a room and shake the hand of Putin unless Putin gets out of Ukraine. Then I'm sure he'll be very happy to shake his hand. So it's going to be at a different level, but I'm sure that's going to follow this conference that is already a success.
Also, talking about the success of this meeting, whether it happens or not, because Trump is very mercurial as well. You never know what is on the cards when you are holding those meetings and conversations with Trump. But I'll come back to that. Glenn, I do want to talk to you about how Trump has once again spoken about economic incentives and trade relationships with Russia, which could perhaps, tide over this crisis and bring about a solution. Trump has spoken very loudly and, repeatedly about how Vladimir Putin is interested in American economy. Do you think this incentive could be strong enough for the Russian government, for Putin to give in and build some sort of a consensus for a ceasefire?
No, sorry. I think that Putin, if Trump offers him things, which I think he probably will, I'm almost sure that Putin will take them and having taken them, then continue as before and find a reason, an excuse for it. I mean, it would have to be something phenomenally serious to persuade Russia that to give up what they're doing in Ukraine, because what they're doing in Ukraine is fundamental to the survival of Russia. They cannot manage without the technical expertise of the Ukrainian people and the people that they get there. So he has to keep going, and I don't think that your average Russian citizen is going to be particularly swayed by a Putin argument. Oh, look, they're giving us access to minerals, because they've got all the minerals they need anyway. They've got all the oil they need anyway. So I'm not sure what Trump has actually got to offer that will make Putin say anything other than thank you very much, I'm going to continue as before.
Okay. Mark, I come back to you and talking about, there's this source-based information. I would like to understand from you what do you think of it, because information coming in that, United States at this point of time is mulling putting more sanctions on Russian oil and gas companies, particularly Rosneft and Lukoil. How do you think this is going to, move the global oil and gas market, and how impactful it is going to be on the European market particularly?
As Glenn alluded to, it's very interesting because I think the Indian government was encouraged to buy more oil, and as their energy minister has talked about, well, actually, we kept the oil market afloat. There will be potentially more economic sanctions, and then dealing with, of course, Putin's got this ghost fleet where he's then delivering oil around the world. Those sanctions, what else do you do except do you then turn around and say, right, we have to arm Ukraine even more to stand up to Russia? We're moving to this point into an area that I don't want to see certain things escalate. However, how do we then stop this? If, as Glenn has quite rightly said, if someone's turning around and saying, no, I am not going to stop, how do we stop this? Is one force coming the other way? You then have to apply a force the other way, and then we can see the consequences of that. Putin is determined, however people then interpret this, as he constantly says, I want a buffer, and has decided to take 20% so far of Ukrainian land, then illegally to actually do that. So I could go round and round in circles on this, because I think there's a phrase that says there's a stalemate to this, but the number one thing is we want the fighting right now to stop.
Okay, all right. Okay, do we have Julia still on the show with us? Julia, thanks for patiently waiting on the telecast. Again, would like to understand from you how, if at all, there can be a solution to this war that has been raging for many years. If there is not, if according to you, this this summit that is taking place in Alaska is not really going to bear any results?
Well, I don't see any solution other than stripping Russia of its ability to continue fighting, because so far Russia has been demonstrating both its willingness and its ability to keep fighting. And so far, Western sanctions have not been efficient enough, and they have not been enforced sufficiently. And also, there were difficulties with European sanctions, with Hungary stalling the process of imposing sanctions. And so I understand that the West does not want to get involved into a direct fight with Russia. And I understand that this poses a danger of escalation. And after all, Russia is a nuclear power. So nobody really wants to get this to a nuclear escalation. But at the same time, President Trump has already offered President Putin some very major concessions, and Putin refused to take those. He did not change his position. And going back to your earlier point that without talking to Putin, you cannot resolve this, I actually would like to remind you that this war started back in 2014. And for 8 years, there have been multiple efforts to find a solution, but this was not possible because Russia lied from the very beginning that it was not a party to the conflict, that this was a civil war in Ukraine, and all these things that made it impossible to actually resolve the conflict. And now Russia is not lying that much, although I mean, now it's a lot more in the open with its demands, but it still does not want to resolve the conflict. It still wants to use negotiations. As we say for Russia, negotiations is war by other means. And so if Putin agreed to meet with President Trump, then most likely he will try to either deceive Trump again, to postpone imposition of sanctions.
Do you think Trump is a leader who could be easily deceived?
So far, he has threatened Putin, and he never did anything drastic to punish him. And every time he had a conversation with him, he came out of it saying that he had such a nice talk and Putin is such a nice guy. But this is not true. So to me, it's clear that Putin is deceiving him.
Okay. Do you also think perhaps more economic pressure could have been built by the European nations, the NATO allies, who still to quite an extent continue to buy Russian gas?
There has to be more economic pressure on Russia, but I understand that also this is not easy, but it needs to be done, because otherwise Russia will continue its aggression. And also, if there is a ceasefire in Ukraine, that will free up Russian troops to actually maybe even try to commit aggression against a NATO country, because we've seen many European intelligence services warn that such an attack is possible.
Okay. All right, fair enough. Coming back to you, Mark, and let's try to understand also, you know, I do want to understand and get your view on this. The reason behind President Trump choosing Steve Witkoff and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor of the country, to be part of the 3-on-3 delegation level talks that are at this point of time happening. We understand Steve Witkoff has been the special envoy, the special man, the loyalist for Donald Trump, whether it is about the Middle East and Gaza conflict and finding a solution for this, or for that matter, the number of times he has sent him to Russia and to Ukraine to have those talks with Vladimir Zelensky, or for that matter, Vladimir Putin. So the reason behind picking these two men, not Pete Hegseth, not J.D. Vance, but picking Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff?
Because of their departmental positions. I mean, personally, I think Witkoff has got a lot too much on his plate. I think he actually needs to appoint someone to actually deal with and address the Russian-Ukrainian situation. But of course, as we say, there's a delegation. People have to talk to each other. But the point I will make as well, again, with Julia here, with Glenn here, within Ukraine, observing what is actually going on the ground, and actually turning around and saying, well, this is the reality of the situation. Their viewpoints and what they're saying are extremely important. While we're watching people then having a conversation, American delegates, yes, they're turning around and going, oh, we're going there in good faith. We might be on ground that we bought off the Russians in 1867, but the Russians, in regard to propaganda, in regard to negotiation, and sadly at times deceit, they're very, very good. They're very, very good at that. But there's coming a point when you can threaten, and Julia's made this very clear in regard to economic sanctions. We need to then look at how we can step that up, because the main thing that Russia is relying on is selling energy of oil and gas. And also, as we have seen, the drone attacks far into Russia on their actual infrastructure to shake it up in a profoundly different way, because Ukraine can then reach them.
Right. Talking about economic sanctions and how there is a need, as you said, to isolate Russia, sanction Russian oil and gas corporations. Glenn, this is only pushing Russia closer to China, and not just China and Russia that are coming closer together. China is the #1 purchaser of oil from Russia, which surprisingly has not received any sanctions from Donald Trump, versus what has happened with India. There are, additional 25% tariffs that have been imposed on India for buying Russian oil. Now, do you see the duplicity with which President Trump is handling the situation, simply because it serves his own interest, vested interest, in dealing with these two countries differently, cozying up to China, even when it is the biggest buyer of Russian oil, but reprimanding and penalizing India for buying oil from Russia?
One wonderful question. Absolutely wonderful question. I mean, you have to, first of all, you have to ask whether Trump actually understands that there's duplicity in that, or whether he's not even thinking about it. Because if he's just thinking country by country, he may not even link India and China as being on the same, in the same sort of zone for this activity. But it is interesting that you can't push Russia any closer to China. So that is, they are as close to China as China is going to let them be. They're already getting weapons parts. They're already getting IT and technology from China for the war. But I don't think China is going to go any closer than that. So it doesn't matter what, in that regards, what we do to that relationship. It will stay exactly as it is. But the India relationship has a possibility of changing, because India has followed the BRICS path, and they've got even sort of acknowledged that what Putin is doing is okay, which of course it's not. And Modi has been to Russia and shaken hands and cuddled with Putin in a way that personally I find a bit abhorrent. But okay, that's him, that's what he's done. But I think that the Americans, not necessarily Putin, but the American system, may think that there is a possibility of actually pulling India away from what it's doing with Russia and possibly pulling it back towards a more Western course than on a BRICS course with China. But hey, does anybody really understand these things or no? The fact we're talking about it shows that these things are not clear. They're not clear to anybody, because it's a complex time. I think most people are just making these things up as they go along in terms of decision, and Trump's decisions about how much you put on people seems to be a day-by-day thing, not any proper thought-out strategy.
Okay, and talking about, can there be can there be a consensus that can be built? And of course, there has been a certain considerable percentage of territory that at this point of time has been annexed by Russia, the Ukrainian territory, and this only single primary demand of Ukraine is to get back that territory from Russia, which the Russian government is not willing to let go of. This continues to be the only, sore thumb. This is only the prickly point that is not allowing for a ceasefire, not allowing for a peace deal to happen. But what happens next is the single biggest question, and we are going to be, highly anticipated is going to be the result of these talks. It's going to take 6 hours. But again, the question, what perhaps could come out of these talks?
Can I just jump back on one point that you've made about
Sure, yeah.
land is not it. It's freedom to be allowed to be the country that they want to be. That is what is important. And land is just part of that deal. Because what Russia wants to do, it's not just, Russia's not after land. Russia is after crushing Ukraine, genocide,
Yes.
killing people, stealing people. So the land bit is just minor in many ways on that. Can we get that out of these talks? The answer is no, because Putin does not himself understand freedom. And frankly, I don't think Trump understands freedom either, judging by the way that he's acting in America at the moment. He's also of the same mind as Putin of, top-down power. And I'm the king and I'm in charge. I mean, you've heard him say it. And if you've got things like that, neither of those two will ever understand society in Ukraine, ever.
Okay. Mark, I do want to ask you this question, and there has been a long-standing demand of President Zelensky to include Ukraine as part of NATO, but this proposal has been downright rejected by United States and by European countries as well, by NATO nations as well. How significant does it become, and how important is it for Ukraine to be assimilated into NATO?
Well, as Julia turned around and said earlier, the concern is the West doesn't really want to put boots on the ground. It's them providing the weapons to them. If Ukraine then comes into NATO, well, of course, then that Putin turns around and says, well, now you are being totally and utterly aggressive. And I do apologize in one sense. It sounds very simplistic for me to say there. And as I say, I'm not sitting where they are viewing things in a totally and utterly different light by being the boots on the ground themselves, because it's there within the Ukraine presently. That discussion, that in the past, you could say that's why Putin went into Georgia, because suddenly Georgia's put on the list where it wants to potentially then join NATO. We've got all of that going on about in the background, why you could then argue why Putin has then reacted. The key thing is, and I don't really want to say it, how is it that we could stop him and stop the aggression? And the way, as I said earlier, it's one force against another force. And when Glenn is talking about, no, it isn't about land, and as Julia was shaking her head and saying that, it's actually about destroying a country, then we're going to have to look at this, I say it respectfully, in a completely different light on the West, because we cannot have this genocide behavior. We cannot have that. And how are we then to do that? Don't put
right. Okay, we'll come back to you, Mark. There seems to be an audio issue over there. Glenn, coming back to you, Trump has not been very sympathetic and nice to President Zelensky in the past as well. We saw that complete showdown that happened during that Washington, D.C. visit. And Trump has been hammering home the point time and again that, there will have to be some concessions that Zelensky will have to make. And he keeps saying that there will be territory that will have to be ceded. If Trump is not a bona fide, trustful leader who could navigate Ukraine to get back its land, to allow for a peace deal to happen, then who is the likely leader who could champion Ukraine's cause?
Why I come back at you on this. Why on earth do you think that any action is going to, even if Zelensky gives up the land or the country gives up the land, why do you think that Russia would suddenly stop and go home? What? There has been no evidence that there will be any opportunity for peace from Putin. No evidence at all. And I think it's, this thing about peace and hoping that some leader can actually manage to persuade Putin to do this it's time wasting to the advantage of Russia. It's time wasting to the advantage of Putin, which is why he had Minsk I and Minsk II agreements, just to buy time to actually to do more activity and to get yourself ready for the next stage, which is exactly what he's doing all the time. And people, you forget, you're thinking all the time of Ukraine. This is not about just Ukraine. This is about destroying the nature of the Western alliance. It's about destroying NATO. It's about destroying the European Union. And it's about destroying everything that we stand for in terms of freedom. Ukraine is just the start.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Glenn, for sharing your views. I thank other guests as well, Mark Sutherland as well as Julia Kasdobina, for joining me on the telecast. Stay tuned on NewsX World. We'll be right back.